Band 5 occupational therapist in Waltham Forest Community Learning Disability team. And my part of the presentation is more about some practical suggestions about how we can keep people engaged, happy and occupied, because as Kate and Amal both showed, that green line at the bottom of the escalation cycle that we're trying to maintain, a lot of that is about having meaningful activities to be involved in and routine and structure. So that's what I'm hoping I can kind of help with today. So when we talk about meaningful activity, often I find as an OT, people will kind of default to thinking that we mean like skydiving or something really productive like going to work, you know, something very exciting, but actually not every meaningful activity has to be that special. And actually being in lockdown has kind of proved that for a lot of us. You know, a lot of us have become more involved with cooking, cleaning, gardening, like getting around to doing all the household tasks that we didn't get done when we were really busy with work. And the people that we support should have that opportunity as well. You know, perhaps it is time to redecorate the home. Is that something they can be involved in, or having a spring clean? You know, people have the right to be involved in even the slightly more boring aspects of their lives. And this is kind of summarised in the phrase "every moment has potential." You know, that's saying that, like, not every moment has to be super exciting. Like, you can have a really important communication or activity breakthrough with someone you're working with in even the most boring of activities. And I guess just to kind of set the scene of you know, the kind of support that's best to provide to people to keep them in that sort of green part of the escalation cycle. It's really important to remember that what's shown here, you know, you've got a cleaner, a chef, a security guard. This isn't one-to-one support. You know, it should be about meaningful activity and how can we kind of get the person that we're supporting involved in every aspect of their lives rather than doing it for them, which I'm sure obviously you all know, but I just always think it's helpful to kind of set the scene there. And importantly as well, this is just something else to be considerate of, especially in a kind of lockdown time where your workplaces will have changed a lot, and there'll be so many more policies and procedures that you have to follow with PPE and all of these sorts of things. But it's really important to remember that, you know, we go into people's homes and we work there. You know, they don't live in our office, they don't live in our workplace, and that's the kind of mentality that we should be having when we're approaching doing these meaningful activities with people. So we'll look at kind of how best to support people to engage. And these kind of phrases here, these are things that as OTs we often see in notes, or we hear from people. You know, is that my client was offered an activity but they didn't want to do it, or, you know, they weren't engaged, or they preferred to remain in their bedroom rather than join in with the group activity. And, you know, fair enough, sometimes that might be exactly what's happened, but sometimes people will decline activities because the right amount of support wasn't offered to them in the right way, or they weren't kind of properly supported to make a choice about whether or not they wanted to engage. So I'll talk briefly about how to provide the right amount of support at the right time to sort of maximise the possibility of people getting involved in these activities. The key thing is little and often. So we want to always be trying new things with people. If people don't seem to like an activity at first, that's fine. You can always try it again. It's not, you know, I might not feel like doing a certain activity right now, but if someone offered it me tomorrow, I might say, yeah, that sounds great. You know, we need to respect people's choices, but you don't need to take a no right now as a no forever. You know, you can go back and offer that activity again. And really crucially, don't always take someone leaving an activity as an indication that, oh, you know, I don't want to do this, full stop. You know, sometimes you'll do an activity, people will feel a bit overwhelmed, they'll go off for a minute and come back and re-engage. So, you know, giving them that choice to re-engage. Don't just pack up the activity if they walk off once. And there's a little video in here that shows this. So let's see if it works. I hope it does, because it's really nice. But I'm not sure that it's going to, which is fine. I'll just talk you through what happens in the video. So this is a video of the support worker who we can see here, and another client, a client in the residential home comes in, and the support worker's getting the potatoes ready for dinner. So they're peeling the potatoes together. The client comes in, and he sits down, he peels, a couple of bits off of one potato, and then kind of pushes the chair back and walks off quite forcefully. And instead of going, oh, where are you going? Hey, come back. Oh, don't you want to do this? The support worker sits down and just very slowly carries on peeling the potatoes herself, just very calmly. And within about 20 seconds, you see the client walk back in, do a couple more bits of the potato, get up and walk off again and come back. And throughout all of that, the support worker is just really calmly sitting there, peeling the potatoes very slowly, so that there's always some for the client to come back to. I'll try and put that video in the chat somehow, because it's a really lovely illustration of some of those kind of strategies. Another really important thing when you're offering support to people when you're doing activities is graded assistance. That's the kind of OT technical term for it, but what it means is offering the right amount of support to people at the right time and breaking things down into their component parts. So just to give a kind of example of this, I often ask people, how do you make a cup of squash? Right, and the obvious answer is, well, you get the squash and you get the water, you mix them together and there's your cup of squash. Bam. Yes, that's technically true. However, there are way more than 2 steps to making a cup of squash. I got up to, I think this is about 8 or 9 different steps in making a cup of squash. So, you've got to get your cup or glass, get it out of the cupboard, which might be high up, set it down on the work surface, which, people may have poor grip, balance, that might be difficult for them. You need to get the squash out of the cupboard as well, open the squash, pour the right amount of squash in, close the squash, put it back, turn on the tap and making sure it's the right tap, is it the cold tap or the hot tap, fill up the glass and turn the tap off. And that's actually quite a lot of steps, something as simple as making a glass of squash. And there are a number of points there at which people might need help and support. And it can be challenging, because if you offer people too much support, they might rightly feel quite patronised by that. If you offer too little, they might feel unable to complete it and get frustrated and therefore not want to engage. And that's something as simple as making a glass of squash. So of course that can become way more complex, and we're talking about much bigger activities. So just a few practical suggestions of the types of assistance that you can offer when you're doing that. And I've related that to the squash as well, just so it's sort of slightly easier to follow. Sorry, frog in my throat there. We have verbal prompting. So you might just say to the person, oh, come on, time to make a glass of squash, and they might well know what that means and follow you. Gestural, so you might point to the bottle of squash. There's step-by-step prompting. So as we saw in the previous slide, we've got all these different steps of making a glass of squash. You might say, okay, get it out of the cupboard, open the squash, now pour a bit in, okay, that's enough, stop. There's visual, which again, like gestural, you're showing them the thing that you want them to do. You could demonstrate the activity, so make it yourself and ask them to copy each step with their own glass as they go. There's physical support that people might need, so if they are slightly unsteady with their grip, holding things, then you might hold the cup for them while hand prompting. So if that's them for people, to them and say, which one do you want? Choose one. And finally, adaptive equipment like a non-slip sleeve on the squash bottle. which could, OTs can help advise on. So you make a referral to your learning disability team if you think that something like that could be helpful. Similarly, this is, it's kind of practical tips for helping people engage in these activities. There's something that we call backward chaining, which is quite like just the demonstrating that I was talking about earlier. So I'll give you an example here of making a sandwich. With backward chaining, you start by doing pretty much the whole activity for the person. So with a sandwich, you might do everything apart from putting the sandwich on the plate. You ask them, okay, why don't you put the sandwich on the plate? And then you take a step back and you do everything except cutting the sandwich and putting it on the plate. And each time you're gradually removing a step and asking them to complete that step instead, until actually the only thing you might do is get the bread out of the cupboard and they can make the entire sandwich themselves. That takes a long time, absolutely. But it's a really helpful way of giving the right support and gradually bringing that back and building independence. Obviously, I don't have the answers to everything, and it is a really delicate balance when you're getting people involved in activities between supporting them and giving them the right amount of choice and control. Some people obviously may have more or less mental capacity in different areas of their lives. But one thing that I found particularly helpful when we're thinking about choice is that choice is not just a yes or no question. We don't want to offer just one activity and say, well, do you want to do this? Yes or no? You could offer 3 or 4 different activities and say, which one of these would you like to do? What seems more appealing to you? So it's just thinking about different ways. If you do often find that people just say, no, I don't want to do anything, how can you rephrase that question? How can you offer them a choice and support them to make it? And again, that is something that the community learning disability teams, wherever you are, will be able to help advise you on. We talked a little bit as well in the previous slides about routine and structure and how important they are. I know that it can be difficult to follow a routine. Like, I find it difficult to follow a routine, so I always feel like a terrible hypocrite telling people, oh, routine's so important. So I wanted to give you some practical advice on how to do this. And I can send out actually a little activity guidance pack, which has a sort of starter pack for this kind of visual routine in it at the end. So what I always find quite helpful is to have this kind of visual setup. So here we've got a table on the one side, and you can make this as specific or as broad as you like. I've put when I wake up, then what do I do in the morning, then what happens at lunchtime, but you could do this like hour by hour. And I tend to make these little cards that you can see on the right hand side of the screen with a picture and a textual description of what the activity is. You'd obviously want to do more than these 4. These are just examples. And each day you can sit down with the person that you support and say, okay, what's our day going to look like today? What are we going to do? And let them pick, I'd like to do some cooking in the morning, and then I can eat that for lunch. So you're giving people choice and control, but there's always this kind of visual timetable they can refer back to of what they're going to be doing. And particularly for people who are autistic, for example, that can be very helpful in bringing down anxieties, because you can say, okay, don't worry, this is the routine. We know what's going to happen next. Getting a bit more into the kind of theory here, but I did want to, just to think about the hierarchy of needs, which you may well have seen this triangle before. But the theory behind it is that we can only start to meet the needs at the top of the triangle once the needs at the bottom of the triangle are met. So, without food in our stomachs and having enough water and somewhere to live, we're not going to be thinking about how we can fulfill our creative activities, for example. And the difficulty in a pandemic is obviously these needs right at the bottom of security and safety, they don't feel very met for most of us. We're living in a very uncertain time. I don't necessarily feel safe myself when we've got this kind of virus floating around. So I guess it's just about, having that understanding that as much as it is important to get people engaged and motivated in these daily activities, actually that's something that it can be even more challenging in a time like now, where people don't feel like their basic safety needs are being met, and they're living through such a challenging time. So I'll just go through, these are just the few very practical suggestions of activities that you can do, because I know it can be quite baffling to think, oh God, where do I even start with new activities at a time like this? So we want to focus on stuff that we can do with very minimal materials, so stuff that's cheap or that you already have lying around the house. Starting from what the person likes as well. There's no point kind of if someone's really into technology saying, why don't we sit down and do an arts and crafts thing, that they may not like. Start from something they do like and build it out from there. And make as much use of technology as you can, stuff like online resources and even virtual reality. So just some simple stuff then. If people like water, I know water is the thing that a lot of people are really into, the sensory aspects of that, and they love running the tap or, taking a bath and things like that. So there's just some cool little things that you can get here. On the PowerPoint, these will actually have links in, so you can follow them and order them yourself if you want to. So we've got a little disco light that goes in the bath. You can turn all the lights off in the bathroom, and it just gives a really cool light effect. Bath bombs, you can get some amazing ones that release these beautiful rainbow colours, and just makes bath time a lot more exciting. And there's also loads of meditations on YouTube that are specifically for when you're in the bath. So we've all got to wash mostly every day. And those are three things that make something you're going to be doing anyway way more exciting and way more of a meaningful activity. We were saying earlier that not everything needs to be special. So things like doing the washing up, for someone that likes water, there's no reason why that shouldn't be their household chore, because then they get to be elbow deep in this lovely, warm, soapy water. And find ways to make those kind of boring parts of the day a bit more meaningful for people. We've got a Tibetan sound bowl here, which is super cool. You fill it with water and you run the little stick around it, and the water kind of vibrates and makes this beautiful sound, which again can be very calming. And then just a swimming pool there at the end. I looked this one up on Amazon. It's about £100. So if there was a garden in the home that you work in, this is just such a great way to get water into the day-to-day sort of thing for people, especially with the weather getting nicer. Some people are really into transport. This might be more of a thing for the autistic people that you support, but obviously it's something that everyone might be interested in. So there's a bunch of links in here to some really cool things like slow TV train journeys, where they've got a little camera that they've fixed to the front of a train, and it goes on for like 10 hours, following this train through all these kind of beautiful bits of scenery. So you can put that on, it's really relaxing for people. Flight radar, so you can see where planes are going in the world at any time, which is super fun for a lot of people. And you can also get live signal data from the train depots. So if you're a bit of a train geek, that's really cool, because you can see where trains are coming in all over the country. So stuff like that, and that's all more online stuff. But yeah, something that may be very interesting, very meaningful to a lot of people we support. People have covered sort of socialising and touch as something that people obviously will be missing. So there's things like Zoom calls, which will be very important to people. But also thinking about how we can incorporate other activities into that. I was thinking about making little cards that you can send to people in the post that say, I owe you a hug, bring that arts and crafts element into it. And maybe doing laundry with the same detergent that people's families use at home. So there's that sensory link. You can kind of smell the same as what the kind of house smells like at home. And there's that sort of comforting link there. And also shopping for clothes that are tight or soft, because tight clothes can give that feeling of a hug. If people really might be missing that, that's something that you can look into. And animals, there are a bunch of zoo webcams out there. So you can see all sorts of animals 24 hours a day in all these zoos, which is great. And I've also got a link there to some animal-based colouring pages, which are very kind of relaxing and meditative. We have a bunch of activity videos as well that we've put out through Waltham Forest on the NELFT YouTube, and the link is in there. Definite plug for what we're doing there, but that's something, if you don't have the time right now to kind of think, oh gosh, how can we develop all these exciting things at home, you can have a look on our YouTube, and there's lots of suggestions there, and people can follow along with the videos at home there. I think that is it. Sorry, that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope that the practical suggestions have been helpful. And if there's any more specific questions, do just put them in the chat. But thank you very much.